Have you ever felt on top of the world after a moment of pleasure, whether it was enjoying your favorite food, experiencing a moment of intimacy, or indulging in something that made you feel good, only to be hit with an overwhelming sense of guilt afterward? You're not alone. It's a feeling that many of us know all too well, yet it's rarely talked about in depth. Why do we feel guilty after pleasure? Shouldn't it be something we enjoy without any regret? In this video, we're going to dive deep into the real reason behind this common experience. We'll uncover the science, the emotional triggers, and the societal expectations that fuel post-pleasure regret. By the end, you'll have a clearer understanding of why you feel guilty, and more importantly, how to break free from the cycle. So if you've ever asked yourself, why do I feel this way, after indulging in something pleasurable, stick around, because the answers might just surprise you. Let's get started. Let's start with the basics, the brain's role in pleasure, and why we feel the way we do after indulging. To understand why we often feel guilty after pleasure, we need to talk about dopamine, one of the most powerful chemicals in our brain. Dopamine is often referred to as the feel-good hormone. It's the chemical responsible for pleasure, reward, and motivation. Whether it's the joy of eating a delicious meal, receiving praise, or even experiencing intimacy, dopamine is at the heart of it all. It floods your system, giving you that burst of happiness and satisfaction. In the moment, it feels incredible. It's a natural high, and it's easy to see why we chase after that feeling. But here's where things get interesting, and a bit tricky. While dopamine certainly makes us feel great in the short term, it doesn't stick around forever. After the rush of dopamine, there's an inevitable dip. That's right, once the pleasure wears off, dopamine levels crash. You might feel relaxed or satisfied for a few moments, but soon enough you begin to feel something else: regret, guilt, or even emptiness. It's like your brain's reward system gave you a treat, but now it's asking for more. This is the real reason why we feel guilty after pleasure. It's because of the dopamine roller coaster that our brain takes us on. When we experience pleasure, our brain releases dopamine in response to the rewarding activity we're engaged in. But here's the catch. Dopamine isn't just about feeling good. It's also deeply tied to motivation. In fact, it plays a huge role in motivating us to repeat behaviors that make us feel good. It's a feedback loop. The more dopamine you get from an activity, the more your brain wants to repeat that activity to experience the pleasure again. This is why habits form. Whether it's food, drugs, or other forms of pleasure, our brain is wired to seek out the things that bring us joy. However, this also explains the feeling of crash that often follows pleasure. Once dopamine levels drop after you've experienced something rewarding, you're left with a desire to chase that high again, but the sense of fulfillment has already faded. Now let's take a deeper dive into how this affects us emotionally. The post-pleasure crash is a kind of emotional hangover. After you indulge in something pleasurable, your brain may start to feel empty because dopamine levels have decreased and the reward center isn't firing in the same way. This makes it hard to keep up that same sense of happiness, which creates a mental imbalance. The cycle becomes even more complex because the brain now associates this pleasure with a need to feel it again, to feel good. But this craving for another dopamine release, whether through food, sex, or another activity, leads to a sense of guilt. Why? Because you know, on some level, that the pleasure isn't long-lasting. You start to question whether it was worth it in the end, and this is the root of post-pleasure regret. When we talk about pleasure, it's also important to mention something called hedonic adaptation. This is a concept in psychology that refers to the way we get used to pleasures over time. In other words, the more you indulge in something that gives you a quick dopamine rush, the less satisfying it becomes over time. Your brain builds tolerance to the reward, so you have to seek out more intense forms of pleasure to get the same feeling. This adaptation is why you may find yourself feeling guilty after indulging in something you once found truly enjoyable. It's not just about feeling bad afterward. It's about how your brain has adapted to the pleasure in a way that makes it harder for you to enjoy it without a crash. So how does all of this tie into post-pleasure regret? Well, the constant seeking of dopamine leads to the short-term high mindset. You indulge in a pleasurable activity. You get a surge of dopamine, and for a moment, everything feels right. But when the dopamine levels fall, and you're left feeling empty, the regret sets in. It's almost like your brain is reminding you that the temporary pleasure was not as fulfilling as you thought it would be. This emotional drop is often where guilt steps in, especially if the activity was one that you might consider excessive or something you feel conflicted about afterward. The guilt comes from the realization that you relied on that quick high instead of seeking out deeper, more sustainable sources of happiness. Let's talk about a real-life example of this process. Imagine indulging in a favorite food, let's say a rich, decadent dessert. At the moment, the pleasure you experience is undeniable. You enjoy every bite, the sweetness, the richness, and the sense of satisfaction that comes with eating something you love. Dopamine is released in your brain, and everything feels good. But then after you finish the dessert, you might start to feel a little guilty. Was it worth it? Did I overdo it? As dopamine levels drop, you're left questioning your decision, and the guilt starts to kick in. This is your brain's way of telling you that the pleasure you experienced is not sustainable. In the end, it wasn't the dessert that brought lasting fulfillment. It was just a quick fix that wore off. This same dynamic plays out in many other areas of life. Whether it's overindulgence in food, casual relationships, or even spending money on something you don't really need. In all of these situations, the rush of dopamine gives you an immediate feeling of satisfaction, but once the high fades, you're left with the feeling that you've compromised your long-term well-being for short-term pleasure. It's a psychological push and pull between wanting to experience that fleeting pleasure and recognizing that it might not lead to long-term happiness or satisfaction. What's even more interesting is that this feeling of post-pleasure guilt is not universal. Some people experience it more strongly than others, depending on a range of factors, including personality, past experiences, and even mental health. For some, the guilt is fleeting and easy to dismiss. For others, it lingers and leads to a spiral of negative emotions. If you tend to experience guilt after pleasure, it may be an indicator that you're more sensitive to the crash that follows dopamine release. It could also point to a deeper inner conflict between wanting to feel good in the moment and wanting to live in alignment with your long-term goals or values. In the end, understanding the science behind post-pleasure regret is crucial. Dopamine plays a significant role in our ability to experience pleasure, but it also plays a key part in how we process the emotional aftermath. The crash of dopamine levels after an indulgence can leave us feeling unfulfilled, questioning our decisions, and ultimately experiencing guilt. Recognizing this biological process is the first step in understanding why we feel the way we do and how we can begin to break free from the cycle of short-term highs and long-term regret. As we continue in this video, we'll dive deeper into how societal expectations, emotional reactions, and self-worth all contribute to the complex feelings of post-pleasure regret. But for now, know this: the next time you feel that pang of guilt after indulging in something that felt good in the moment, you can understand that it's not just about your choices, it's about the intricate dance between pleasure and the brain's natural need to recalibrate after a high. We've all been there, indulging in a moment of pleasure, only to be hit by the familiar wave of guilt afterward. But here's the question: why does it feel like we're doing something wrong, even when we're just enjoying ourselves? Why do we often feel guilty about things that are supposed to bring us happiness? It turns out, the answer may not only be rooted in our biology, but in the deep, pervasive influence of societal expectations. From the moment we're born, we're taught how to feel about pleasure, what's acceptable, and what's not. And unfortunately, society's messaging around pleasure is often laden with guilt. Let's start by considering how society shapes our views of pleasure. Take a moment and think about the kinds of pleasure that are often regarded as bad. Overindulgence in food, excessive drinking, or casual sexual encounters are often labeled as guilty pleasures. We associate pleasure with indulgence, and indulgence with something that needs to be apologized for or hidden away. Society frequently encourages moderation, balance, and self-discipline. And while these values can be beneficial, they also set up a moral framework that makes pleasure seem shameful when it exceeds certain boundaries. This isn't just about enjoying the moment, it's about controlling it. The very idea of enjoying something without restraint can trigger feelings of guilt, because for many of us, indulgence doesn't sit well with the values of restraint and self-control that we're conditioned to hold dear. Take the simple act of enjoying a rich, indulgent meal. Now think about the messages we get from media, social circles, or even family. The moment you finish eating that decadent slice of cake, the message that society subtly reinforces is, "You shouldn't have had that, or you'll regret this later." Why? Because society often equates indulgence with weakness, lack of control, or failure to live up to certain ideals. That piece of cake isn't just a piece of dessert, it's a representation of letting go, and in many minds, letting go is synonymous with being out of control. This narrative is deeply ingrained in our minds, and is something we learn from a young age, creating a framework where pleasure becomes something to feel guilty about. We've all heard the familiar line, everything in moderation. But what happens when moderation isn't on the table? We end up feeling guilty about things that should simply be enjoyed. The societal pressure to be good, to make the right choices, and to always stay in control seeps into our daily decisions. It's no surprise, then, that this pressure amplifies post-pleasure regret. When we give in to something pleasurable, whether it's eating a rich dessert, engaging in casual sex, or enjoying a shopping spree, the immediate reaction of guilt is often not just a result of the pleasure itself, but of the conflict it creates with these deeply ingrained societal norms. It's the tension between the act of enjoying something and the underlying belief that you shouldn't have enjoyed it in the first place. This conflict results in guilt, and the stronger the societal pressure to be good, the more intense that guilt feels. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Our culture's stance on pleasure isn't just about what's considered acceptable. It's also about the narratives around productivity and worth. We live in a society that often rewards productivity and self-discipline above all else. Pleasure then becomes something that stands in direct opposition to productivity. When we enjoy something, we take time away from work, we take time away from being productive, and we often associate that with being lazy. Society tells us that self-worth is tied to how much we accomplish, how well we manage our time, and how disciplined we are. But what happens when we step outside that framework and engage in something purely for pleasure, with no end goal or productivity tied to it? That's when guilt strikes. It's not just about what we've done, it's about how it stacks up against the expectations that society has placed on us. Consider the guilt that arises after a weekend spent binge-watching a TV series. It's enjoyable, right? You're engrossed in a captivating show, and it feels good to unwind. But when it's over, that voice starts creeping in. I could have been more productive. I wasted the weekend. This isn't just you being self-critical. It's the influence of a culture that prioritizes productivity and views leisure as something that must be earned. We're often made to feel like relaxation or enjoyment needs to be justified, even when it's the very thing that helps us recharge. It's not just food or entertainment that gets caught in this cycle of guilt. The same societal expectations affect how we view our own bodies and sexual pleasure. We're taught that certain kinds of sexual expression are bad or wrong, and that only certain types of relationships or encounters are worthy of celebration. Casual sex, for instance, can be viewed through a lens of guilt. Society has long attached shame to enjoying sex outside of conventional relationships or without the promise of commitment. While some may feel empowered by embracing their sexuality, for others, this freedom becomes clouded by the shameful teachings they've internalized over the years. As a result, engaging in sexual pleasure may lead to feelings of regret, not necessarily because of the experience itself, but because of the judgment placed on it by societal norms. This is why post-pleasure regret isn't just a fleeting feeling. It's a complicated emotional response to the tug-of-war between individual desires and societal expectations. Guilt isn't just a reaction to a specific action, it's a reflection of the tension between what you wanted in the moment and what you feel you should have done, according to the rules of society. The more we internalize these societal pressures, the more guilty we feel when we give in to pleasure, even if it's harmless or simply self-care. Here's an important realization. When pleasure becomes something we feel guilty about, it doesn't just stay in the moment. The guilt lingers, shaping our behavior in the future. The more you internalize societal messages about pleasure being bad or wrong, the more you'll feel hesitant to indulge in things that bring you joy. You begin to question your own desires, which only fuels the guilt. This creates a cycle where the very act of enjoying yourself becomes associated with shame. In turn, this shame makes you less likely to experience true guilt-free enjoyment in the future. But here's the thing. Pleasure is natural. It's part of being human, and it's time we start changing the narrative. Instead of viewing pleasure as something to feel guilty about, we need to recognize that it's essential for our well-being. Sure, indulgence can be excessive, but when it's balanced, it's healthy. We don't need to apologize for enjoying ourselves. It's about understanding that we deserve moments of pleasure without the need for justification or guilt. It's about breaking free from the societal expectations that try to keep us in check, constantly monitoring how much pleasure we're allowed to experience. Now, the next step is recognizing how this all comes back to how we view ourselves. What does it mean when we're constantly battling guilt after pleasure? We'll dive into that next as we uncover how self-worth and guilt intertwine, making post-pleasure regret even more intense than it needs to be. Stick around, because the pieces of this puzzle are about to come together. We've all experienced it, the sudden shift in our emotions after a moment of indulgence. 1 minute, we're savoring a moment of pleasure, whether it's a delicious meal, a moment of intimacy, or some other form of indulgence. But almost immediately after, something changes. That joy and satisfaction start to fade, replaced by an uncomfortable feeling. You start to feel guilty, ashamed, or even regretful for what just happened. You might ask yourself, why did I do that? Or was it really worth it? It's a feeling that can leave you confused, frustrated, and wondering what just happened to that moment of happiness. This emotional aftermath is a complex and often misunderstood experience. What happens in our minds after we indulge in something pleasurable is more than just a simple feeling of guilt. It's a combination of psychological responses, many of which are deeply rooted in how we view ourselves, our actions, and our desires. To truly understand why we feel guilty or regretful after pleasure, we need to look at the emotional processes at play. At the heart of this emotional aftermath is the concept of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when we hold two conflicting beliefs or attitudes at the same time, which causes mental discomfort. In the case of pleasure, this dissonance happens when our desire for immediate gratification, the pleasure, conflicts with our longer-term goals or values. For example, when you indulge in something that feels good in the moment, like eating an entire pizza or engaging in casual sex, you're satisfying an immediate need or desire. But then, almost as soon as the pleasure subsides, your mind starts to reel. You begin questioning whether that decision aligns with your overall sense of well-being or personal values. This is the conflict that creates guilt. Your brain knows that in the long run, indulging in something that doesn't serve your larger goals may have negative consequences, but in the moment, the pleasure felt so rewarding that it becomes difficult to reconcile. Now, this cognitive dissonance can take many forms, depending on the individual. Some people may feel guilty because they've been taught that pleasure is bad, or indulgent behaviors are to be avoided. Others may experience regret because they realize that their actions didn't align with their personal goals or aspirations. For example, after eating an unhealthy meal, you might experience guilt because you know it's not in line with your health goals. Or after a fleeting sexual encounter, you may feel empty afterward, questioning whether the brief pleasure was worth the emotional consequences. This is a classic case of cognitive dissonance, the tension between what you want in the moment and what you know is best for you in the long run. But guilt isn't the only emotion that comes after pleasure. Shame is another powerful force that often follows indulgence. While guilt focuses on the action and the behavior itself, shame targets the self. When you feel ashamed after indulgence, it's not just about what you did, it's about who you are. Shame makes you feel like there's something wrong with you as a person, because you gave in to something that society, or even your own values, deems inappropriate or indulgent. This is particularly true when the indulgence contradicts the ideals you hold for yourself. For example, if you pride yourself on discipline and control, but you find yourself overindulging in food or indulging in an unplanned spontaneous act of pleasure, shame can make you feel like you've failed. You start questioning your self-worth and the value of your decisions. In this way, pleasure becomes tied to self-judgment, and the emotional aftermath becomes even more intense. Regret is the third emotion that commonly follows pleasure, and it often ties in with both guilt and shame. Regret happens when we wish we had done things differently. It's the feeling of looking back and realizing that our indulgence didn't lead to the satisfaction we expected, or it created consequences that we didn't foresee. After a moment of indulgence, we often feel that regret because we anticipate the negative consequences that might follow, such as weight gain, poor health, emotional emptiness, or even social repercussions. We wish we could go back and make a different decision, choosing a path that wouldn't leave us feeling bad afterward. This feeling of regret is linked to our ability to anticipate consequences and our desire to align our actions with our long-term values. But in the heat of the moment, the immediate pleasure clouds our judgment, and it's only after the fact that we feel the emotional fallout. This emotional fallout isn't just limited to individual behaviors like eating or sexual indulgence. It extends to many areas of life. Think about shopping sprees, for instance. After a significant purchase, you might feel a rush of excitement when you first acquire the item. But then, as you leave the store or get home, that high quickly fades. You begin to feel regret. Was it worth the money? Did you really need it? This regret often leads to guilt. Guilt about spending money irresponsibly, or guilt about falling into consumerism. This is another example of the dissonance between short-term pleasure and long-term values. Another critical aspect of post-pleasure regret is the effect it has on your mental health over time. When you experience guilt and shame frequently, especially in response to pleasures that you've indulged in, it can lead to a diminished sense of self-worth. If you repeatedly feel that your indulgences are wrong or immoral, this can erode your sense of value and self-compassion. Instead of viewing the indulgence as a moment of enjoyment or relaxation, it becomes another source of judgment and self-criticism. This chronic cycle of guilt and shame can lead to deeper issues, such as anxiety or depression. If you consistently judge yourself for seeking pleasure, you can become disconnected from your own needs and desires, leaving you feeling empty, disconnected, and unable to enjoy life fully. This emotional burden can then make it even harder to break the cycle of post-pleasure regret. So, what's the solution? Understanding the emotional aftermath of pleasure is the first step in breaking this cycle. Once you realize that guilt, shame, and regret are natural emotional responses to the conflict between your desires and your values, you can start to address the root cause. Instead of labeling your indulgences as bad or wrong, it's important to practice self-compassion and understand that pleasure is a natural part of life. It's okay to enjoy things without feeling like you have to pay for it afterward. The key is balance, learning to enjoy pleasure in a way that doesn't conflict with your deeper values. By acknowledging the emotional aftermath without judgment, you can reduce the impact of guilt and regret. This doesn't mean completely abandoning the desire to act in accordance with your values, but it's about recognizing that pleasure doesn't have to be the enemy of long-term goals. It's also essential to create a healthier mindset around pleasure. Instead of viewing it as something to feel guilty about, consider it as a form of self-care. If the pleasure you indulge in brings you true joy and contributes to your well-being, then it's not something to regret. And if you do experience guilt or regret, try to examine why it's there and what deeper values it's triggering. Understanding your emotions helps you navigate them in a healthier way, ultimately leading to a more balanced relationship with pleasure. In the next section, we'll explore how our sense of self-worth and self-esteem plays a role in how we experience guilt after pleasure, and how we can begin to break free from this cycle. So stick around, because we're going deeper into the reasons behind the emotions you feel after you indulge, and what you can do to change them. Have you ever found yourself spiraling into guilt after indulging in something that was supposed to bring you joy? You know the feeling, a fleeting moment of pleasure followed by a heavy sense of regret. And it doesn't stop there. You start questioning your worth, wondering if you're just weak or undisciplined. But what if the guilt you feel isn't just about the indulgence itself? What if it's really about your sense of self-worth, and how you view yourself in the aftermath of that pleasure? At the heart of post-pleasure regret lies a deeper issue: self-worth. Self-worth is how we view ourselves and our inherent value. It's the foundation of our self-esteem, and it influences how we handle all aspects of life, including pleasure. The way we interpret and respond to our actions is often shaped by how we feel about ourselves. And when it comes to indulging in pleasures, whether it's food, sexual encounters, shopping, or anything else that gives us that immediate reward, the guilt we experience isn't just a reflection of the act, it's a reflection of how we see ourselves. If you have low self-worth, that guilt becomes amplified, often making you feel like you're not deserving of any form of pleasure or happiness. Let's take a step back and think about the ways in which we're conditioned to connect pleasure with self-worth. Many of us are raised with the idea that we need to be productive, disciplined, and in control in order to be worthy of love, success, and respect. From a young age, we're taught that indulging in things we enjoy without the justification of hard work or earning it makes us lazy or undisciplined. Think about the messages we've been given, whether through society, family, or school, that link self-worth with productivity. You need to work hard to deserve that treat. Good things come to those who put in the effort, or you'll feel better about yourself if you've earned your pleasure. These messages condition us to believe that pleasure must be earned, and that if we indulge without earning it, we're somehow failing in our duties as responsible adults. This mentality becomes even more toxic when we link self-worth to how well we're able to control our impulses. If you grew up with the idea that you should always be in control of yourself, whether that's through food, spending, or relationships, you might begin to see pleasure as something that undermines your value. For example, if you're someone who prides themselves on being disciplined in their eating habits, allowing yourself a moment of indulgence can feel like a failure. You might think, "I shouldn't have done that. I've lost control. I'm not the person I thought I was." This internalized belief makes the pleasure itself feel tainted. Instead of being a moment of relaxation or enjoyment, it becomes a mark of your failure, a reflection of who you are, or who you believe you've become. This is where the link between self-worth and guilt becomes particularly complicated. When you view yourself through the lens of guilt after indulging in pleasure, it's not just about the indulgence itself, it's about your identity. The guilt you feel is tied to how you see yourself as a person. Low self-worth often causes people to feel like they don't deserve pleasure or happiness unless they've earned it or worked for it. This creates a cycle where pleasure becomes something to feel bad about because you've internalized the belief that you need to be good or perfect in order to enjoy it. You start to believe that indulgence is a flaw, and the pleasure you experience only reinforces that negative self-image. For example, let's say you indulge in a dessert after a long, stressful day. In the moment, it feels satisfying, but then the guilt starts to set in. The internal narrative becomes something like, I shouldn't have eaten that, I don't have any self-control, or I'm weak for giving in to temptation. These thoughts are reflective of your inner self-criticism, and they come from a place of low self-worth. You're not just punishing yourself for eating the dessert, you're punishing yourself for not living up to the version of yourself that you think you should be. This creates a divide between who you are in the moment and who you think you should be. It's this gap that fuels the cycle of guilt and regret, making it even harder to break free. But what's more interesting is that this cycle of guilt can lead to even worse feelings. Shame. While guilt focuses on specific actions, shame targets your entire identity. When you feel ashamed, it's not just about what you did, it's about who you are as a person. Shame can be far more damaging than guilt because it creates a deep sense of unworthiness. If you experience shame after indulging in pleasure, it's likely because you've tied your actions to your value as a person. For instance, if you overeat or engage in a behavior that you deem bad, shame makes you feel like you are a bad person. This isn't just about a specific action, it's about your entire sense of self. You internalize the belief that you are unworthy or undeserving of happiness, and this feeds into a negative self-perception. This toxic loop makes it even harder to experience pleasure freely, because you constantly feel that any form of indulgence will be met with judgment, either from others or more often from yourself. Now, let's take a deeper look at the role of self-compassion in breaking this cycle. Self-compassion is the ability to treat yourself with kindness and understanding, especially when you've made mistakes or acted in ways that you later regret. The key here is not just to forgive yourself, but to view your actions through a lens of understanding, rather than judgment. When you make a decision to indulge in something pleasurable, instead of criticizing yourself afterward, you can practice self-compassion by acknowledging that you're human and that enjoying something is part of life. This shift in perspective allows you to let go of guilt and shame without letting them take root in your sense of self. Imagine a scenario where instead of immediately falling into a spiral of guilt after eating something indulgent, you take a moment to check in with yourself. Instead of telling yourself, I've failed, you say, I enjoyed that and it's okay. I made a choice and I can move forward without dwelling on it. This simple act of self-compassion helps to break the connection between pleasure and guilt. It takes the emotional weight off your actions and prevents guilt from becoming a reflection of your self-worth. Additionally, changing the narrative around pleasure is critical for improving self-worth. Instead of associating pleasure with failure or loss of control, begin to view it as a form of self-care. Pleasure is an essential part of maintaining balance in life. When we allow ourselves to experience joy without judgment, we begin to see pleasure as a natural and healthy part of who we are. It doesn't diminish our worth or undermine our discipline. It simply allows us to experience the fullness of life as we are. The truth is, we all deserve to experience pleasure without feeling guilty about it. The key to overcoming the guilt and shame that come with indulgence is to start building a healthier relationship with ourselves. When we strengthen our sense of self-worth and practice self-compassion, we begin to understand that pleasure isn't the enemy of self-control. It's a necessary part of maintaining balance in our lives. By reframing how we view ourselves in relation to pleasure, we break free from the cycle of guilt and embrace a more fulfilling guilt-free experience of life. So the next time you indulge in something that brings you joy, remember, you're allowed to enjoy it. You're allowed to experience pleasure without attaching shame or guilt. And more importantly, you're allowed to be kind to yourself when you do. Recognize that your worth is not determined by how perfectly you control your desires. Your worth is inherent, just as you are. In the next section, we'll explore practical strategies for breaking the cycle of guilt and shame. So stay tuned, because we're about to dive into actionable steps that will help you regain control and make peace with pleasure once and for all. By now, you've probably recognized that post-pleasure regret is a complex emotional experience. It involves a combination of biological, societal, and psychological factors that lead to feelings of guilt, shame, and even regret after indulging in something that should be a simple pleasure. But here's the thing. Just because this cycle is powerful, doesn't mean it's unstoppable. The good news is that there are practical strategies you can use to break free from the grip of post-pleasure guilt and start enjoying life's indulgences without the emotional fallout. These strategies are all about changing your mindset, taking control of your emotions, and learning to embrace pleasure without judgment. Let's start by acknowledging that the first step toward breaking the guilt cycle is to accept that guilt, shame, and regret are natural emotions. These emotions are human, and they often arise when we feel we've strayed from our values or self-imposed rules. The problem isn't the emotions themselves, it's the way we respond to them. Instead of getting stuck in a loop of self-criticism or internal punishment, it's important to shift your response. So let's dive into how you can start doing that today. The first strategy is to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of being present in the moment without judgment. When it comes to pleasure, mindfulness is an incredibly powerful tool because it helps you experience the pleasure without overthinking or overanalyzing it afterward. Often we get caught up in the aftermath of indulgence, reflecting on how much we ate, how long we spent, or whether it was right to enjoy it. This reflection often leads to guilt. Mindfulness, however, teaches us to experience the moment fully without attaching any moral judgment to it. When you enjoy something pleasurable, whether it's a delicious dessert or a fun night out, focus on the sensations, the enjoyment, and the experience itself. Give yourself permission to savor it, and then let it go without judgment. By focusing on the present, you're able to disconnect from the guilt that often creeps in afterward. Instead of thinking, "I shouldn't have done that," you can think, "I enjoyed that, and that's okay." Another powerful tool in breaking the guilt cycle is reframing your thoughts. When you start feeling guilty after indulging in something pleasurable, your mind can quickly spiral into negative self-talk. You might think things like, "I'm out of control," or "I'm weak for enjoying that." These thoughts only reinforce the guilt and shame you're feeling. The key here is to recognize when you're having these negative thoughts and gently reframe them. Instead of labeling your behavior as bad or weak, ask yourself, "Why did I do this?" It could be because you were stressed, you wanted to treat yourself, or you simply enjoyed it. Recognize that pleasure is not inherently bad or immoral. It's part of being human, and we all deserve it. By reframing your thoughts in a more compassionate and understanding way, you take away the power of guilt and replace it with a more balanced, realistic view of yourself and your actions. Reframing allows you to see pleasure as something natural and something you can engage in without self-punishment. One of the most effective ways to break the cycle of guilt is to develop self-compassion. Self-compassion is all about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a friend. If you were talking to a friend who was feeling guilty about indulging in something pleasurable, would you tell them they were weak or out of control? Of course not. You would remind them that they're human, that pleasure is a natural part of life, and that they don't need to feel bad about it. You need to extend that same kindness to yourself. When you feel guilty after indulging, pause and remind yourself that it's okay to enjoy life. It doesn't make you weak, irresponsible, or undisciplined. It makes you human. You deserve to experience joy and pleasure without constant judgment. The more you practice self-compassion, the less likely you are to fall into the trap of guilt and shame. You'll begin to see that you are worthy of enjoying life, and you won't allow guilt to diminish your self-worth. A crucial strategy in overcoming guilt is to examine your underlying beliefs about pleasure. Ask yourself why you feel guilty about enjoying something. What beliefs or messages have you internalized about pleasure that might be influencing your guilt? Do you believe that pleasure should always be earned, or that it's a form of weakness or indulgence? These beliefs are often rooted in societal expectations or personal experiences, but they don't have to dictate your relationship with pleasure. By identifying these limiting beliefs, you can challenge them and replace them with healthier, more balanced perspectives. For instance, instead of thinking, "I shouldn't have enjoyed that," try reframing it as, "I enjoyed that and it doesn't take away from my ability to be responsible or productive." By actively questioning and replacing negative beliefs about pleasure, you give yourself permission to embrace enjoyment without guilt. Another key aspect of breaking the guilt cycle is creating balance. Guilt often arises when we overindulge or when pleasure is followed by negative consequences. The solution isn't necessarily to deny yourself pleasure, but to find balance. This doesn't mean becoming rigid or overly restrictive, but rather learning to enjoy things in moderation. You don't have to overeat to enjoy food, and you don't have to overindulge in anything to feel pleasure. By creating balance in your life, you prevent the guilt that comes with excess. This balance also extends to how often you indulge in pleasurable activities. Pleasure shouldn't be a rare treat that you feel guilty about. It should be a regular part of your life that you can enjoy in moderation without overthinking it. This balance allows you to feel satisfied without the emotional aftermath of guilt. Furthermore, it's important to redirect your focus to long-term goals. One of the reasons we feel guilty after indulgence is because we feel like we've taken a step backward from our long-term objectives. Maybe you're trying to eat healthier, work out more, or save money. Indulgence can feel like it's in direct opposition to those goals, triggering guilt. But here's the truth. Enjoying pleasure doesn't negate your long-term goals. It's important to find ways to integrate pleasure into your life without abandoning your larger objectives. When you focus on your long-term goals, you can enjoy moments of pleasure without feeling like they're undermining your progress. For example, if you're working on building a healthy lifestyle, having an occasional treat or taking time to relax doesn't undo all of your hard work. Instead, it helps you recharge and continue moving forward. By reframing how you view pleasure in the context of your larger goals, you can reduce the guilt that comes with indulgence. Finally, celebrate the progress you make. It's easy to get caught up in guilt when we focus only on what we've done wrong or what we feel we've overindulged in. But progress isn't just about avoiding indulgence, it's about how you handle it. Every time you resist the urge to fall into a guilt spiral and instead practice self-compassion, mindfulness, or reframing, you're making progress. Celebrate these moments. Give yourself credit for breaking the cycle of guilt and enjoying life without judgment. These small wins add up and help shift your mindset over time. Breaking the guilt cycle isn't about completely avoiding pleasure or becoming rigid in your behaviors. It's about understanding that pleasure, when enjoyed in balance, is a healthy and necessary part of life. By practicing mindfulness, reframing your thoughts, developing self-compassion, and examining your beliefs, you can enjoy life's pleasures without the emotional weight of guilt. You deserve to experience joy without the aftermath of regret. So take a deep breath, acknowledge your humanity, and remember, pleasure is part of living a full, balanced life. In the next section, we'll explore how to integrate these strategies into daily life to ensure that you can maintain a healthy relationship with pleasure long-term. Stay tuned, because we're about to dive into actionable steps that will change the way you view indulgence and guilt. As we've explored throughout this video, the experience of post-pleasure guilt is not just a fleeting feeling, it's a complex emotional process that's shaped by our biology, societal expectations, and most importantly, how we perceive ourselves. We've uncovered how dopamine, that feel-good hormone in our brain, triggers a natural high after indulging in something pleasurable, but also sets us up for a crash. We've delved into the societal pressures that make us feel guilty about enjoying life's indulgences, and we've explored how our sense of self-worth and the beliefs we hold about ourselves amplify these feelings of guilt, shame, and regret. But most importantly, we've discussed how breaking free from this cycle of guilt isn't just possible, it's essential for living a more fulfilled, balanced life. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that pleasure is something we need to earn, something that only comes with strict control and discipline. And when we give in to those indulgences, we quickly start to feel guilty, ashamed, or like we've failed. This can be especially true when we have a deep-seated belief that we shouldn't experience pleasure unless we've earned it or been good enough. Whether it's a rich dessert, a spontaneous shopping spree, or a night of casual fun, society often teaches us to feel bad about enjoying ourselves, especially when those moments of pleasure seem to contradict our goals, our self-discipline, or the image we have of ourselves as responsible, controlled individuals. This guilt can become so powerful that it starts to shape how we view ourselves, not just as people who indulged, but as people who are somehow flawed or less deserving of happiness. But here's the truth. The cycle of guilt that follows pleasure is both unnecessary and harmful. It's a trap that keeps us from fully experiencing life, enjoying the good moments, and embracing the joy that we all deserve. The key to breaking free from this cycle lies in understanding that pleasure is not the enemy of self-discipline or responsibility. It's a vital, healthy part of life. You can have balance, you can indulge without guilt, and you can be kind to yourself when you do. The strategies we've discussed today, mindfulness, reframing your thoughts, practicing self-compassion, and examining your beliefs about pleasure are all powerful tools that can help you break free from this emotional cycle. Let's first remind ourselves that mindfulness is a cornerstone in this process. It teaches us to be present in the moment, to enjoy pleasure without judgment, and to savor experiences without overthinking them afterward. The next time you indulge in something pleasurable, whether it's a favorite food, a relaxing bath, or time spent with someone you love, try to focus fully on the experience. Notice the details, the taste, the texture, the warmth, the laughter, and allow yourself to enjoy it. And when the moment ends, don't fall into the trap of guilt. Let it go. Don't let the pleasure be overshadowed by second-guessing or self-criticism. Mindfulness helps you separate the enjoyment of the moment from the emotional aftermath of guilt, allowing you to enjoy life without constantly questioning whether it was worth it. Reframing your thoughts is another crucial step in shifting your perspective on pleasure. As we've discussed, it's easy for our minds to spiral into negative self-talk after indulging. But by recognizing those negative thoughts and reframing them in a more compassionate way, you can break the guilt cycle. Instead of thinking, "I shouldn't have done that," or "I failed," try replacing those thoughts with, "I enjoyed that, and it was okay to do so." By acknowledging that pleasure is a natural and healthy part of life, you begin to release the judgment attached to it. This reframe empowers you to enjoy life without feeling like you have to justify your actions or punish yourself afterward. One of the most important shifts in breaking the guilt cycle is developing self-compassion. The way you treat yourself after indulging in pleasure can make a huge difference in how you experience guilt. If you're constantly critical of yourself for enjoying life's pleasures, you'll never be able to fully embrace them without judgment. But when you practice self-compassion, you offer yourself the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a friend. Instead of berating yourself for enjoying that slice of cake or taking a spontaneous trip, you acknowledge that you're human. We all deserve pleasure, and we don't need to earn it. Self-compassion helps you break the cycle of guilt and allows you to move forward with a sense of peace, knowing that indulging in life's pleasures doesn't make you weak or irresponsible, it makes you whole. Another step in overcoming guilt is examining your beliefs about pleasure. So often, our guilt stems from the beliefs we've internalized from society, family, or personal experiences. If you were taught that pleasure should always be earned, or that indulgence is inherently bad, you might struggle with guilt every time you allow yourself to experience pleasure. But the truth is, pleasure doesn't have to be tied to guilt. It doesn't have to be earned or justified. It's a natural part of life, and we deserve to experience it without feeling bad afterward. By examining your beliefs about pleasure, you can begin to challenge those limiting thoughts and replace them with healthier, more balanced perspectives. It's about understanding that pleasure is not something to feel guilty about, but something to appreciate in moderation. Creating balance is another critical element in breaking free from guilt. As we've discussed, guilt often arises when we overindulge or when we feel like we've strayed from our long-term goals. But the key is to recognize that pleasure can coexist with balance. You can enjoy a treat without it derailing your entire health journey. You can take a break and watch a movie without it making you feel unproductive. The key is moderation and understanding that one moment of indulgence doesn't define you. When you create balance in your life, pleasure becomes something you can enjoy without guilt because it's part of a well-rounded, healthy lifestyle. Finally, celebrating progress is an essential aspect of breaking the guilt cycle. Instead of focusing on what you've done wrong, focus on the progress you've made. Every time you choose to enjoy life's pleasures without guilt, that's a win. Every time you practice mindfulness or self-compassion instead of criticizing yourself, that's a victory. Celebrate these small wins. Recognize that breaking the cycle of guilt takes time, and each step forward is a step toward a healthier, more balanced relationship with pleasure. So, where do we go from here? Now that you understand the science behind post-pleasure guilt, the societal pressures that influence it, and the role self-worth plays in this emotional cycle, it's time to make a choice. You have the power to break free from guilt and shame. You can embrace pleasure without regret, guilt, or self-judgment. You can choose to enjoy life's moments without attaching a moral value to them. It's all about balance, self-compassion, and challenging the beliefs that have kept you trapped in the guilt cycle. The next time you experience pleasure, whether it's big or small, try to focus on the joy of the moment. Savor it. Enjoy it. Let go of the guilt and the judgment. And when you're done, don't look back with regret. Look forward to the next moment of joy, because you deserve it. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this video has helped you better understand post-pleasure guilt and given you some tools to break the cycle. I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you experienced post-pleasure guilt, and how have you learned to handle it? Let's continue the conversation. And if you found this video helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more insights on living a balanced, fulfilled life. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.